Pressure is growing on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his handling of the war in Gaza.
Those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/448, please raise their hand.
The United Nations Security Council voted today to adopt a U.S. drafted resolution backing the ceasefire proposal outlined by President Biden last month. Russia abstained from the vote, allowing it to pass. It comes as Netanyahu faces a quickly shifting political reality at home.
They know what should be done. Hopefully they will stick to what should be done.
Benny Gantz, a centrist member of Israel's war cabinet, resigned on Sunday. He's accusing Netanyahu of putting his own political survival ahead of the country's security needs. Gantz's departure means the Israeli prime minister is now reliant on far-right allies to stay in power. Far-right allies that are threatening to bring down the government should Netanyahu agree to the ceasefire proposal on the table. For insight on this, we're going to talk to Jon Allen. He's a former Canadian ambassador to Israel. He's now a senior fellow at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Jon, always good to speak with you. Let's start with your reaction to that UN Security Council vote. They've never passed before. They've always been vetoed. One goes through today.
Good news. Good that the United States sponsored it and that everybody voted yes, of course, except Russia, who abstained, possibly just because they don't want to give the U.S. The benefit of it. It calls on both sides, but especially Hamas, to accept the proposal, given that it's apparently an Israeli proposal for peace. Hopefully it will have some effect, but I'm not 100% sure that it will.
The other thing that happened over this weekend was Benny Gantz quit. He's always often cited as one of the moderate centrist voices in the war cabinet compared to the other coalition members. He said he met with Netanyahu to discuss the post-war plan for Gaza and didn't like what he heard. How do you think that conversation went? What do you make of Benny Gantz leaving?
Well, Benny Gantz has been calling, as have many, many others, including the Biden administration, his fellow war cabinet member Eisenkot, and Ehud Olmert, Ehud Barak, former prime ministers, have all been calling for a day-after strategy, something that does not see Israel reoccupying the Gaza Strip, which most people feel would be a disaster and would prevent others from coming in to begin the reconstruction of the Strip. Gantz has been threatening to leave for 3 weeks, and Bibi has ignored him, basically called him effectively a traitor for leaving in the middle of the war. But as you mentioned, this now leaves Netanyahu with his two far-right cabinet ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who oppose any ceasefire of any kind and frankly do not prioritize the hostages, which is something that, hundreds of thousands of people in Israel are demanding.
So with that dynamic, I mean, how does that affect Netanyahu's decision-making? The Biden proposal that was spelled out a couple of weeks ago, the Israeli ambassador here in Canada went to great lengths to point out on social media that this was an Israeli proposal, not a U.S. proposal. But now you've got this far-right coalition propping up Netanyahu, some of whom want to resettle Gaza. They want to take it over. So how can you get to peace with that dynamic?
Very difficult, very difficult. Hamas is saying that, they look positively towards the proposal, but they're demanding that the ceasefire become permanent and that Israel leave the Gaza Strip unconditionally. And while Bibi says it's his proposal and he agrees with it, he continues to say that wiping out Hamas is his priority and that they are going to continue to do it. So these two goals of these enemies don't seem to coincide on this alleged peace proposal. So it is very complicated and not terribly optimistic at this point.
So how do you think, I mean, what can we draw from how the next steps of this go? I mean, if the coalition partners that remain with Prime Minister Netanyahu are not supporters of the peace process he's apparently put on the table. There was a very violent rescue of 4 hostages, that Hamas was holding apparently in the home of a Hamas member, that there's a lot of criticism for because of the high collateral damage. That matters to the international community. It doesn't seem like it matters to the coalition in the Israeli government. I mean, how does this affect how the military operations and diplomacy might go in the next little while?
Well, you're right. For the hostages and for the Israeli population and for Jews in the diaspora, this was a wonderful moment of seeing these people released after 9 months of being held by Hamas. But I think most people continue to believe that the only way to get the majority of the rest of the hostages out is through a negotiation and at least a temporary ceasefire. I'm just hoping that this doesn't harden the Bibi Smotrich Ben Gvir camp into thinking that somehow more of these raids are going to get all of the hostages released, because it's not very likely. The only thing that can get rid of Bibi Netanyahu and move to elections right now is either massive protests on the streets of Israel, which are probably unlikely in the midst of a war. There's thousands and thousands of people protesting the failure to get the hostages out, but it's not the way it was prior to October 7. And the only other thing is for 4 or 5 members of the moderate members of Bibi's Likud party to break from him and then force an election. And I know the opposition has been trying to get them to do that, but so far they've resisted.
They've also resisted the pleas of the United States, but that doesn't stop the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, from going there quite frequently. He's back in the Middle East today. He met with Netanyahu to talk about that post-war plan for Gaza. How do you think that conversation went, given the political reality Bibi Netanyahu finds himself in?
I don't think it probably went terribly satisfactorily for Biden. Unfortunately, it's very much part of the larger plan that the United States has for Israel and for the wider Middle East, getting the Saudis and Israel and the United States on board together for a larger regional peace and a coalition that would oppose Iran and its proxies. And this is the vision that at one point Bibi would have embraced. But now, because it also involves a path forward towards a Palestinian state, he and, of course, his 2 right-wing ministers have rejected it. So it's very, very unfortunate. This could be, a major breakthrough, having a wider peace, recognition of Israel in the region, path forward to a Palestinian state. These are all very positive, but Bibi will not countenance talk of a 2-state solution, will not countenance the PA going into Gaza and providing some governance eventually. And so I'm sure it was complicated, and it's certainly complicated for Joe Biden, who's got a convention coming up in Chicago. And the last thing he wants is for an anti-war protest to feature there.
Well, if history tells us anything, John, Democratic conventions in Chicago at a time of great unrest during overseas wars is never a good recipe for the Democratic Party. Jon Allen, you're always a good recipe for insight and analysis. Thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.